So I have here one of the modules for Modcon. It's the R400B 3-axis joystick. So it's got a button on the top, and it's got tilt, and it's got twist. Okay, so it's got 2 potentiometers on the side there, so that is variable resistors essentially. And also it's got some wires coming out of it for the potentiometer that's hidden up inside this head for the twisty detection, and then the other 2 wires are for the button. So I want to do a quick video that shows how to do the soldering for this thing. And you might think, oh god, soldering, I'm not some sort of technical wizard, but it's really not that hard. All you need is some basic tools. I'm not going to do a super in-depth how to solder video, I'm sure there's a lot of those, but just want to make a quick one to cover what you need to know for this particular project. So the cables that I think I might use for this are these colourful ribbon cables that have little sockets on the end, so you can plug them onto pin headers like this stuff. So you can, these will be on the PCB, and you can just clip them on, and they make a nice solid connection. And this stuff is dirt cheap. This thing here is worth about $1, $2. So you'll need some solder. Doesn't really matter what sort. I mean, there are a million different varieties of everything, but I use tin solder, no lead, just because lead is bad for your brain. I switched over to tin lead-free solder a couple of years ago when I had kids, because it's bad for little brains. So you don't really need flux or any kind of other stuff, because most solder you buy has got flux down the center of it, so that's fine as is. For a soldering iron, this is just what I have. You don't need this one. This is a Harco, but you know, any old soldering iron will do for this stuff. It's quite crude. Again, there's a million different opinions, but for starters, just for a one-off little job that doesn't need to be done super precisely or super quickly, this is fine. If you get a cheap one, it'll probably come with this, like a sponge like this for cleaning the tip. That's great, just wet it a bit, that's all you need. Personally, I like to use some brass wool. Does exactly the same thing, it just doesn't cool the tip down as much when you use it, so you can clean and keep going without having to wait for the iron to heat back up again. That's basically the only factor. So what I'll do is I'll grab some of this ribbon and I'll pull off 3 pieces, and we'll solder up one of these potentiometers. So there's 3 tabs on here. One is one end of the resistor, so there's sort of a circular resistor inside this thing that goes around like that. And then this center one here is the tap, and that, as you tilt the joystick back and forth, that tap sort of spins around to this extreme or spins around to this extreme. But when the stick is in top dead center like it is now, then this wiper or tap is sitting right in the middle. So if you put 0 volts on this one and 5 volts on this one, then that wiper is sitting at 2.5 volts. And so that tells you when that 2.5 volts goes into the PCB, into the microcontroller, it knows the joystick's in the center. So you see I've already done this one over here, and let's do this one. So there's 3 tabs, so we'll grab 3 wires. Color, not important. Pull them off, they just split like that. Oh, well, you also need some side cutters, or just a pair of pliers with the chompy bit. Again, you can go as technical or as not technical as you like. So chop it in half. Now we want to expose the copper, so the easiest way to do that is just sort of damage the sheath a little bit, damage the plastic around the copper, just by giving it a little squeeze. If you cut right through it, just do it again. Not the end of the world, but you see there, I'll sort of just damage the outside a little bit to make it weaker, and then just grab it, and then pull it off, pull the plastic off the metal. Done. So it might take you a few tries to get that, but that's all there is to it. So now we split these to make them a bit easier to work with. And then we just twist the copper, because by default from the factory it's just straight. So we give it a little twist, that helps it not fray when we're working with it. So you can strip off a bit more of the plastic, a bit less, doesn't really make a difference, just go with the flow. Okay, so with soldering, there's a million different ways of doing it, but like there's proper NASA certified ultra strength robust splices and all this rubbish. For what we're doing, we just need it to stick. That's all that's important. Now, solder itself is not very mechanically strong. It's just liquid, low melting point metal, like tin or lead. So it doesn't really have much mechanical strength, but it's good enough for what we do. Like, I can pull on this, and it's like, yeah, it's not coming off. It's fine. But to give yourself a little bit of a fighting chance, if you do accidentally yank on something, it's a good idea to make use of these little holes that you see in the tabs here. And so the easiest way to do that is just to put a little bend in the copper, like that, and then just hook it through, like that, and so just fold it down a little bit. So it's got a nice little hook to it, so it kind of holds on by itself. Easy. So the key with soldering is to get everything the same temperature. And so you get the tab hot, you get the wire hot, you get the solder hot, and everything just goes bloop and sort of flows together at a surface tension. So get my soldering iron, get my solder. Oh, I've got a little bit here chopped off. And so then you want to wet the soldering iron a little bit with a tiny bit of solder. Blub, blub, blub. Get it on there. And if the soldering iron has a blob of metal on the end of it, that makes it easier for the heat to transfer out of the soldering iron into the metal. So now we touch the soldering iron with the blob on it onto the tab and the wire, get it all nice and hot, and then feed a bit more solder into the blob until everything's kind of wet with solder. Then you're done. Once it's all wet and the solder's flowed into all the join, then that's as good as you're going to get. That's a perfectly adequate solder for the home gamer. And so I'll do the same for these ones, put a little bend in it, tuck it through the hole, fold it over. So that's already cold enough to touch. Like, don't think soldering is some impossibly deadly, dangerous thing just because it involves molten metal. If you drop a blob of solder on your foot, you're like, ow, that hurts. And then you're fine. Don't worry about it. So we've got those wires hooked in there now. So wet the soldering iron, touch it onto the tab, touch it onto the wire, make sure everything gets up to the same temperature, and then just feed in some solder. Doesn't matter how much, just till it's wet. Do the same on this one. There we go. Bob's your uncle. So now that's good to go. So we'll connect these up to our PCB and we'll be able to detect where the stick is. Let's do that now.